What's going on, everybody, and welcome into this edition of Card Central 365, powered by Gray Bar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. And all content here on STL Sports Central is brought to you by DraftKings. The crown is yours. Brenden Schaeffer, Mike Claiborne of the Cardinals Radio Network, here to talk about this Denver series. Claibs, the Cardinals got it done against the Rockies last night, who are just, man, they're overmatched this year, it would seem.
Man, they've lost 76 ball games. I mean, which is hard to do at this stage. We're not out of July.
Yeah.
And you know what the really bizarre thing about it? They had 27,000 people show up for a team that's only won 12 games at home. It is a really nice park. It's one of my favorites. Yeah. But it's a mess for a lot of different reasons. But, you know, Cardinals did what they were supposed to do. They went in and they beat a team handily. They were down 2 runs early. They came back and tied the game. And then from that point on, it was all Cardinals. And that's what you're supposed to do against a team like Colorado. You cannot give them the feeling that they can compete. And the Cardinals did that last night, and they're going to have to do it again tonight. A little bit of a different situation with Fedde compared to McGrevy. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We'll talk on McGrevy here for a moment, Claibs. I think everybody is of the consensus that, man, this is somebody they want to see stick around. Ollie wants to see him stick around. Wilson Contreras had great things to say about Michael McGrevy last night. Michael McGrevy's performance on the mound had good things to say about Michael McGrevy. 7 innings, did the job, pretty efficient. Not a big strikeout guy, but doesn't necessarily have to be to give the Cardinals a chance. How do you view what Michael McGrevy gave them and maybe what the next path for him could be? Seemingly, he's got to stay up with this roster, but I guess the question of how they make that happen is still floating out there.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm sure they're having discussions last night and today about it. I don't see how you can send him out. I mean, at this point, if he's part of your future, you need to pitch him. You need to have him out there. And I think it makes a statement to the rest of the ball club that you're committed. So I'm of the belief that he's going to stay here. Now, how that roster looks from this point on, there's like a few different things you could do. You could send somebody out. You can maybe you release somebody. I mean, there's some things you have options at. But, one thing, last night you're playing the Colorado Rockies. You weren't playing the Philadelphia Phillies. You weren't playing the Milwaukee Brewers. You weren't playing any of the top flight teams. I thought he did a really nice job and his composure was good. I thought early he was a little gassed. I think the altitude may have had a little bit of effect on him, but he was able to rally himself and come back and give you 7 quality innings. Something we haven't seen since July 1st. Think about that. We haven't seen a Cardinal pitcher go 7 innings since July 1st. So it was good to see him do that. And he's going to make them have to make a tough decision. I don't think it's that tough. Yeah, you stay. We'll figure out who's going to go.
Yeah, that's the job that the front office has right now, is to figure out whose spot he's taking, not whether he'll take one. And, of course, tonight could play into that. Eric Fedde has been, struggling since late June. And the last outing before the break that he gave him against the Braves, it was 4 2/3. It was 3 earned runs. And I hate to say that it felt like that was maybe the best case scenario you were going to get from him that day. And that's maybe just not a real sustainable way to do things. So what are we expecting now? And the altitude, of course, that can play into things at Coors Field. But also it is against a Rockies lineup that should be more manageable than some others. Feels like an important start tonight for Fedde.
I think it's critical. He could be a casualty if it doesn't work out. If they start serving him up early, then you have to make some hard decisions. Colorado, when you look at them as a ball club, they're not bad when you look at some of the players. I mean, you have Tovar, you have McMahon, you have the center fielder who's a Gold Glove guy. I mean, they have some good players, but for some reason they just can't pull it together. Pitching obviously has always been a concern anytime you pitch in Colorado, but you still have to beat this team. There's no excuses. You have to beat them. They've only won 12 at home. They won 12 on the road, 24 wins total. You cannot be the 25th victory for them.
Yeah, and I would agree. This has to be a sweep, or we can really forget about, talking about this team and the contending nature of it. There's a lot of conversations about whether or not they sell. Some of the guys like Helsley, Phil Maton, and that's going to be maybe a question that John Mozeliak and his staff are still looking to get a good answer on over the next handful of days or so leading up to this trade deadline. But a sweep against the Rockies just has to be the prerequisite if we're going to talk about this Cardinals teams. And in terms of a team that can really make a push over the final 2 months, you just have to beat a team like this 3 times.
and you know what? They shouldn't even be close. I mean, you should go out and really put this team away. Easier for us to say than to do, because as I remind Ollie, they pay those guys on the 1st and the 15th to do a job too. So, but you have to get on them early and really just take the spirit out of them, because they've gone through this so many times during the course of the year. So it's going to be something to pay attention to. Now, to talk a little bit about trades, obviously they have to make a decision. Are they in or are they out? If they're out, who do you move? Well, I think, to me, the guy who has probably the most marketability right now is Steven Matz. It's all about Phil Maton. Now, I know some would say, well, what about Helsley? Helsley's had a good season, but, we knew him as a guy who threw 100 miles an hour fastball. That's the pitch he's been getting beat on. No, his slider has been pretty good. It's a very good slider. But, hey, if guys start sitting on that pitch, then he's going to have a problem. Maton is a guy who can do a lot of things for you. He's a middle of the game pitcher. And then when you shorten up these games, a guy with his experience is certainly going to be a plus for you. And I think Steven Matz has pitched his best baseball as a Cardinal this year coming out of the bullpen.
Yeah, and those are 3 guys, Claibs, on expiring contracts. So if you're the Cardinals and you don't believe that this is going to be your year, it would seem that the path forward would be to get what you can for these players. There was maybe a point in time where you thought with Helsley, could you offer a qualifying offer? He just hasn't had a good enough season to where I think that would be in the cards for him. So you're talking about moving these guys and potentially getting something back like they did a couple of years ago when they were clearly out of it at that 2023 trade deadline. But it's just interesting. I think it's interesting that the bullpen is really the pieces that we're talking about. And I'm not saying the Cardinals, if they traded the 3 names that you mentioned, would be just the same team when you call up, whether it's a Fernandez or a Roycroft or it's Riley O'Brien that's now charged with the 8th or the 9th inning. I'm not saying it would be the exact same, but I think there would be some value, Claibs, in my opinion, to, hey, thrust some of these relievers into those spots and learn a little bit more about those guys as well for future years. And stranger things have happened. I mean, relief pitching is a fickle spot. I could see a realm in which the Cardinals, how many times did they need Ryan Helsley over the weekend in Arizona? Like there could be a world in which they're not that much worse off. Of course, easy to say when you're in a week where you don't have a lot of those 3-2 games. I just think it's not impossible that they could, with the rest of their roster, play decent baseball down the stretch and learn more about the guys they have on their team.
They could. And I think you mentioned him in Riley O'Brien, who's really pitched well recently. Jojo Romero has seemed like he's found it. So those are 2 guys you don't really worry about. And Matt Swanson has done a nice job. All the call-ups this year, he's probably been the most effective. And then you also have Kyle Leahy. He's a guy that, we're trying to figure out just who is he. So there's some questions certainly to be asked. Does it diminish you a lot? I don't know. You lose experience. That's what you lose more than anything else. But this is a year of evaluation. So this is a way we evaluate whether they can take this load on or not. And if they can't, then you have to move elsewhere.
And I guess the question would be, if with these guys intact as part of your bullpen, you're still kind of still a stone's throw away from making the postseason. I don't know what necessarily changes in your mind, Claibs. What happens down the stretch if the Cardinals do hold these players that suddenly vaults them into comparison with these other wild card teams or the other teams from your division that are ahead of you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in order to be a legitimate contender, you have to do a couple of things. You obviously, we've addressed the bullpen. You have to get some more starting pitching that gives you a chance to get to your bullpen. And you need a little bit more punch off the bench. I mean, there's not much there. I mean, Garrett Hampson's been around for a while, but he really hasn't been as effective as you would hope. Jose Fermin is giving you some good at bats. And then when you look at Pozo, he's done a nice job. And so JC's trying to figure it out. So you probably need a little bit more experience in that area of a guy who understands his role, knows he's not going to get a lot of at bats, but when he's called upon, you're going to have to get something out of him. So, that's kind of where you're at. And what does that cost, I think, is the other question. What are you willing to give up to get a little bit more experience there or to get another pitcher? Now we're sitting here trying to figure out how to staff a team as it is. But, man, if you can find another good arm in the bullpen that can give you some chances along with that starter. And I'm not talking about a Rich Hill or Eric Fedde type. I'm talking about a guy who can come in and give you some legit innings. Maybe even a guy that maybe you have control over for next year.
Yeah, that
Because
to me. Oh, I'm sorry, Cliff.
if you look at next year, you figure Sonny's going to be here, Liberatore is going to be here, and McGrevy. After that, I think everything else is a coin flip. Palante's shown he can do some things, but Palante probably is a fifth starter, maybe. And I don't know who else within the organization is ready. It looks like Graceffo is going to be a reliever, and Quinn Matthews is a guy who is a guy who's been set back with some injury. So maybe he's a guy, but man, that's a lot of youth up front, man, in your rotation for next year.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And that's sort of the way that I've been looking at this as well. If there was a way, and Aaron chiming in, that he doesn't see it as a World Series team, so he'd prefer to see the Cardinals sell. Mama mentions this. If you can get a legit starter from trading from surplus, I would hold on to more than I would if you can't get a starter. If you can't get a starter, I would sell everything you can. What about that idea that if you're making a trade for a good arm, it is a controllable arm, and you're probably giving up maybe players from your actual starting lineup, Claibs, to say, hey, we've got a surplus of these types of bats. Now, maybe it's hard to do when guys are on the injured list, but generally speaking, they've had more guys than spots in the lineup, and a lot of left-handed bats as well, some of them playing the similar position group. If there have been names like Taj Bradley of Tampa, I'm not sure that there's a huge chance he's dealt, but if those types of guys are available in the market, I would trade some controllable offense for some controllable pitching and maybe attach a prospect to do it, because people don't ever want to part with their good pitching. That would be the way I feel like John Mozeliak and his front office could allow this club to take a step forward at this deadline without just putting all their chips in on 2025.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I think this is a team where everybody is expendable. We don't have anybody who you say, oh, no, you heavens, you can never trade him. I've been in this game a long time, and I can name the guys on one hand. I said I wouldn't trade them. And the last guy I thought about like that was Albert. Okay, so it's been a while. But everybody else is expendable. And that doesn't say that they can't play and they can't help you, but you're always looking to try and find someone who is going to make your ball club better than what it was the day before. And if you can find that person, that's one thing. I think the challenge the Cardinals have is there's a lot of teams looking for the same thing they are. And a lot of teams are willing to maybe move some maybe higher thought of prospects than what the Cardinals have, because the Cardinals really don't have what you would call mouth-watering prospects right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't think the Cardinals want to necessarily move from their prospect depth, which is why, and again, I recognize it's difficult because you've got Gorman on the injured list, you got Nooper on the injured list. Those are two guys that conceivably you could tell other teams, hey, there's years of control with this player, there are skills with this player that you could find enticing, and maybe if you've got a pitching surplus, we find a match there. But you could be right, Claibs, that the problem the Cardinals may run into, in addition to having some of their trade chips honestly banged up, is the idea that other teams, if they're selling on a player, they might be looking down the road a couple more years and saying, this guy's controllable for 3 years, but we're not really in that contend window necessarily. We need prospects. We need young players that we're going to see 2-3 years down the road. And right now, either the Cardinals don't have those players, or they probably shouldn't be super willing to deal from that depth, unless it's like maybe you go the catcher position where you've got multiple catcher prospects. But other than that, it just seems like that would kind of fly in the face of the idea that you're building for the future.
Yeah, you make a good point. And the catching prospects are so raw. They have potential.
Yeah.
But, what team is going to wait on a guy for 2 years? The other thing that goes into this, when you look at players that have been injured and you want to make a move, I'll just give you 2 words: Tommy Edman. It worked out for the Dodgers to have him. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that the guys the Cardinals have that are hurt are going to be the next Tommy Edman, but we know it's something that's an option now that some teams, depending on the injury, would be willing to wait on. My only concern is, have they done enough for somebody to have a legitimate interest, and give you something in return?
Yeah, well, let me ask about a specific player then. I don't think at the beginning of the year any of us were talking about Lars Nootbaar in these terms. And I know Nootbaar's had a down year, but if you look at his numbers in the past 5 years, a good track record, but the durability is an obvious question that teams are going to have about him. My thought would just be, doesn't he feel like the archetype of a player where 2 years of team control remaining, has the StatCast numbers, right, that jump off the page, just hasn't really put it together. That feels like the type of player that gets traded a lot at the deadline when teams are saying, hey, a change of scenery and this guy could be our all-star. I don't know if people view Newt that way, but just as an example of a name that you could be thinking about from that group of currently injured players.
Yeah, I think when you look at a good team, he's probably a 4th or 5th outfielder. Now, some teams value that more than others, but I think on a really good team that's a playoff contender, that's where I think he would stand. And as you mentioned, just trying to stay healthy has been really a concern. But, this year, as you touched on, he's had a kind of a down year. And, he's kind of leveled out to being an average player. When you think about the strikeout walk ratio and the OPS and things of that nature, it's kind of like average because, we talk about what a good eye he has. Newt was going to end up leading the team in strikeouts had he been playing.
Yeah, he really struggled there for a while, and that good eye that had been getting him really far in previous years was seemingly, not in consideration. And he's also been dealing with this side discomfort for so many weeks that eventually they put him on the injured list. But his numbers were trailing off before that, so it's not just to say that the injury is the excuse or the explanation. But that's what's interesting. They've got a lot of guys in that boat that we'll kind of have to consider what it looks like. And we'll continue breaking things down as we go along here on Card Central 365. But want to take a quick moment to let you know about DraftKings Pick 6. You can download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now. And if you use code STL Sports, that's code STL Sports, for new customers, you play $5, you'll get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Great time of year to sign up and get to playing on DraftKings Pick 6. Better payouts, bigger wins only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. One per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
Claibs, a little bit of a question for you that changes topics a bit. I'm curious for your take on this as we talk about this trade deadline. And there's the notion of, could they add something to make them better? Are they selling some of these short-term assets that we talked about? Or are they going to be somewhere in between? Does the answer to that question change your thought on whether or not they should be involving Chaim Bloom's influence and acumen a little bit more into this deadline? Or in your opinion, is this still going to be John Mozeliak's show and Bloom will just kind of be there to react to whatever Mo may choose to do over the next 10 days?
That's been like the $64,000 question. I think that Chaim is obviously engaged with what's going on. And I think if Mo is doing it the right way, he's going to give him enough space to work from with regard to how this team is going to look down the road. So he's not going to saddle him with a bad contract or a player that can't help you or something along that line. So it's one of those deals where they both have to kind of look at each other and say, we probably can be a wild card or be in that hunt, but at what cost? If we can do it with the players we have, that's one thing. But if we have to start moving assets, that's a whole different subject. And what are you getting in return? Here's the other thing that comes into this. They have to be on a similar page on what a prospect looks like. If you're going to make a deal, what organizations do you feel develop players that are conducive to what you feel is going to help your ball club? You're probably not going to do a deal with Pittsburgh. You're probably not going to do a deal with some teams that really haven't had a lot of great success. So you have to look at that first, and you have to make sure that those two are on the same page and thinking, Tampa does a good job in developing pitchers or whatever. And you have to look at it along that line to make sure you're not getting players that can't help you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair interpretation. It's just interesting, too, in what I have advocated for, the idea that you could trade for a controllable starting pitcher that sets you up a little bit better going into next year. Okay, if you're trading from your major league team, you've got a guy like Newt Barr that certainly I don't think is under consideration right now for a contract extension. So if Chaim Bloom has an idea, he might say, that's somebody that if there's interest, you could consider moving him. But Chaim Bloom might look at Brendan Donovan and Does he say, hey, now's the time to capitalize on his trade value, do something that nobody expects? Or, no, I was hoping to extend Brendan Donovan, maybe have a conversation with him after the season, obviously needing ownership's approval there. A lot of different ways that this could go, Claves, which is why if there's not that cohesiveness, I'm hoping that there is, it would seem like it would be hard to make a move of scale, a big move in the next 10 days because of the way the organization is currently structured at the top. Like, it maybe something small happens, but with two different guys that might have ideologies that need to work in concert, but maybe won't always do that. It's interesting that it may kind of put the Cardinals in a spot where they don't do anything big in either direction.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And I think also when you look at the teams that are contending, and we're seeing teams that feel like they want to load up, whether it's more pitching, maybe it's another bat, whatever. Do they have the same kind of assets to move as the Cardinals do? And the answer is probably yeah. So, what the Cardinals might be trying to acquire may cost them more than it would cost somebody else who has more assets to deal with. And the same thing as I just mentioned on the other side of that coin, you have to make sure you get somebody who can play coming back. And I'm thinking of a guy who's been elevated from AA to AAA this year, who is going to come into camp next year and be seen. And hopefully at some point early in the year, we might have him on the roster. But I need to create more competition internally.
I think that's 100% right. And J.J. Weatherholt is certainly making his mark right now in AAA, and he's a name that a lot of Cardinals fans are excited about. And maybe part of that conversation is the question of where he's going to play next year. I'm of the mind that you don't have to know that answer today, but you do have to start to get an understanding for it. And maybe the moves on the rest of the roster will help to determine that. But Michael chimed in here with a question, or a comment rather, that he thinks the Cardinals should be trading Brendan Donovan at this deadline simply due to the fact that, he's an all-star. It's been a career year for him, and he's in that category where you've only got 2 years of team control. And do the Cardinals consider an extension, or do they choose now to capitalize on one of their better trade assets if they were to sell? How do you view that? And does the JJ conversation play in? Because you could say, well, if you did move a guy like Donovan, there's a spot for JJ. You could also come up with a spot for JJ by moving players that aren't all-stars though as well. I'm curious for your take on just Donovan generally speaking.
The Donovan thing is attractive, but I think Donovan possesses an element other than numbers that makes him an important player on this ball club. From a character standpoint and leadership standpoint and all the other things that has made him the player he is, probably would hold on to him a little longer because I'm not sure if I'm going to get as much for him in a trade deadline deal that I would in the offseason. That's if I want to move him. And I think one of the reasons why he didn't get signed to a long-term deal after the season, I think they wanted to make sure that Chaim had that ability to say, okay, this is a guy we want to hold on to. This is a guy we want to extend. Because let's face it, when the Cardinals have done this in the past, it hasn't always worked out. Now, you think about the Matt Carpenter deal when they signed him and they didn't have to. Colton Wong was another guy they signed and they didn't have to. The only time it actually worked where they bought out a guy's arbitration years was Albert. And that turned out okay. So you have to be very careful about making sure you make a commitment to a guy well before you need to.
Yeah, that's fair. I just would be interested to know, because with Chaim Bloom's history with Tampa Bay, a lot of times the way they did things was that guy gets a little bit closer to free agency, they'll trade him if they don't plan to extend him. And so how Chaim Bloom and the Cardinals in general will view Donovan will be interesting to me come the offseason.
But Brendan, I think the other thing that we had to take into account, Chaim Bloom is dealing with a different ownership group than the Tampa Bay Rays, where the Cardinals have shown the ability to spend money. You think about it, you had Arenado and Goldschmidt's contracts at the same time. They paid a lot of good players a lot of money. Tampa has never done that with any consistency. So when you have an ownership group that gives you the green light to have a little bit more payroll muscle, that may change your outlook on how you evaluate players and how players are going to have an impact on you and your future.
No doubt about that. And hey, for the record, I am in on Brendan Donovan contract extension.
I'm gonna tell him you want to trade him. When I see him today, I say, "Hey, man, Brent, he wants you out, man." I don't know why.
I was the guy that maybe went a little further in saying I was worried the Cardinals maybe. And again, Brendan Donovan's a pro's pro. The conversation he had with the media back in Jupiter after the arbitration thing, he said all the right things and did all the right things. But I actually felt then a little aggrieved on his behalf that they weren't ready to consider a contract extension at that time. I know that this was a year where ownership was looking to maybe pull back a little on payroll. My hope would be, and I've said it to anyone who will listen, Donovan is the guy you plant your flag on and build around. So I'm all about an extension for him.
I agree. And I think that the reason why they didn't do it is because they already came out and said, we're going to be very conservative with money.
Yeah.
And then it turned around and give him a contract that kind of defeats the purpose of what this year was supposed to be. I'm sure there's been a conversation that goes along the line. Hey, look, we're definitely interested in keeping you. We don't want you to feel like we were ignoring you, but this is the approach we wanted to have for this year. We can get this resolved.
I would love to see that. And I believe, too, the Cardinals aren't super far away. This is a player that his prime years are still several years in front of him, next 5-6 years. I don't think you sign that contract and regret it. I think his game on the field, and as you mentioned it in the clubhouse, is something that you're able to, and you can also send a message to the fan base to say, hey, this isn't a 5-year teardown. We're willing to, for the right player, give a contract to say he's going to be part of it the next time that we win. No, that's my scared me there for a second, Claims. No, that's my Brendan Donovan stance for those who have who are interested in hearing it. But it's been good, Claims. I know you're out there in Denver doing great work for the Cardinals Radio Network, and so we'll see if Eric Fedde and maybe that lineup too can get to Bradley Blaylock tonight. The gentleman comes in with a big ERA.
He's got an ERA just under 10.
Yep.
So in Colorado used a few arms in their bullpen last night. So you hope that if you can get to him early, put some runs on the board, and give Fedde a cushion, things will go well, and then you'll be set up for tomorrow for the sweep.
That is the plan as they have the day game tomorrow, and then back in St. Louis for a big series against the Padres in that wild card chase. But that's going to do it for this episode of Card Central 365, powered by Gray Bar, your distributor for electrical and datacom needs. And of course, all content on STL Sports Central is provided by DraftKings. The crown is yours. For Mike Claiborne, I'm Brenden Schaeffer. We'll see you later on tonight for the postgame.